Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. We've got a new mini-series on coaching, and we've got two special guests who I'm about to introduce. But if it sounds a little bit different, it's because we've got a whole new setting, and we're sitting here under lights, and we'll be able to access this, I think, through video as well as podcast. But before I sort of carry on prattling about that kind of thing, I want to hand over to Catherine and to Hayley, our guests. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
here.
absolutely.
Lovely
Nice
to be back.
together.
So, coaching is a big part of the MAT, and coaching is a big part of sort of, leadership and staff development and well-being and all of those things. And both of you have a lot of experience and varied journeys in coaching. So, Catherine, I don't know if we start with you and you talk about Leadership Edge and your whole background with coaching, and then Hayley, I think you're a very well known.
Tired of me by now, surely.
I'm definitely not going to say that. But also, we know your background, but maybe we go into your background sort of in coaching as well.
Great.
But Catherine, if I just hand over to you first.
Yeah, thank you. It has been a long and windy journey, as most people's are. So I went into teaching late in my 20s after having done other roles first and just feeling like they weren't really making the kind of contribution, like what is my why of doing these roles? They were great roles, some quite glamorous roles in Premiership football and working for a multimillionaire and exclusive travel and all these things, but they all left me feeling a little bit questioning as to what's it all about and what's the purpose ultimately of this. So yeah, ended up going into my PGCE in my late 20s, and I was lucky enough to be on the fast track programme, government funded at the time, to bring people out of industry to fill some of the leadership gaps that were occurring in education. And that came with a coach, which was my first experience of being coached. It wasn't perhaps pure coaching in the way that we do it now with Leadership Edge, but it was a one-to-one ongoing relationship with another professional who helped me to clarify what I wanted, what my purpose was, where I was on my development, and that really helped me to apply for different roles and move forwards in my career. And yeah, so within 5 years I was applying for the assistant headship. I was a secondary English teacher, and obviously a lot of imposter syndrome came with that, thinking, how can I be doing this? In fact, so much so, I didn't tell anybody that I was applying for that role. So I should apologise now if any of my colleagues from there wondered, like, how come you never told us? Because I just thought it was almost ridiculous that I was applying. But I was just really curious about what impact could I have if I did have that senior leadership role. And yeah, they gave it to me. And it was a teaching and learning across the school role, which meant going into people's classrooms and giving feedback to some very experienced, seasoned teachers. And I knew at that point coaching was the way forward to have those conversations. On the fast track programme, we were lucky enough to be taken to different places for different courses, and coaching was one of those. And I knew, I think, instinctively that going into the typical feedback sessions with these experienced teachers, being quite young myself and certainly new to that school, because that was my second school. I'd only been there about 18 months when I was given the promotion of assistant head. So in those feedback sessions, I wanted it to be an opportunity to build rapport with those teachers, build a connection. And it seemed to work really well because they were opening up in those conversations, not just about what happened in the lessons, but more so where they felt they were on their journey within teaching, and maybe if they'd been doing it a long time, was their confusion about all the new things they were being asked to do and what was the point in doing all these things. And I just held the space for them to really reflect on themselves as a teacher. And it was wonderful because I ended up having people email and come round and say, can you come and watch me, please, with my really difficult Year 10 class, lesson 5 on a Thursday, because I don't know what to do with them. They're too, on the ceiling, or not engaged or whatever. And I thought, wow, what a powerful thing coaching has been to enable those professionals to come to me and say, I want you to come and see me at my most vulnerable, and have a conversation with me afterwards so that I can unpick what's going on there for me and for those students so that I can get better. And it was at that point I thought, gosh, this is something that really ought to be widely available. I had my children and I went on maternity leave, and during that time I had my own time to reflect on my career, and it wasn't really feasible at that time with our situation. My husband was working away a lot, so I couldn't really go back to that sort of full-time senior leadership role. So I explored the idea of coaching and embarked on my professional qualifications. So started with a level 3 online, and then I did a wellbeing type coaching, level 5, then I did executive coaching, level 7, and started up my own coaching business, which was North Star Coaching, all about finding your own purpose and following your direction, and worked with some head teachers and so on, doing that because I wanted to bring it back into schools, and then fell into the arms of Leadership Edge, who I knew were offering a similar service, but doing it in a much more robust, systematic and self-sustaining way, which really appealed to me. So at the same time as joining the Leadership Edge family, I did my level 7 in coaching supervision as well, because I knew that to make a coaching culture sustaining internally, there needed to be that quality assurance and that safe space for the coaches themselves to continue to reflect on their development and their impact. So that's where we are now. And then, so that was 2019-ish, I think, that we first met. And, bought the company from Jan in 2022. And I'm really excited to just see it grow and see more and more appetite for this in schools and trusts up and down the country.
So there's Catherine's journey, and ours sort of overlaps a little bit. So if I go back to... it's a long time. I joined the teaching profession quite late. I'd had my 2 children really young, and joined teaching profession. I became an NQT on the same day that my daughter started reception, in the same school. So we both had packed lunches together that day and both went off on our separate journeys. And similar to Catherine, I was involved, being slightly older, joining the teaching profession. I also joined Fast Track, and there were some amazing bits to it. There were some interesting bits to it. But one of the most amazing things was the amount of financial support they would put in supporting you in whatever you saw as your route through teaching, and backing that with courses that weren't watered down by other school leaders going there first and coming back and giving you their interpretation, actually saying, there's £1,000, here's a variety of courses, national-wide courses, pick where you'd like to go. And I absolutely just stumbled upon a 3-day, what was, I now know, really high-quality coaching development with Will Thomas up in Liverpool. So I went and spent 3 days with him up there. And actually the whole of the 3 days didn't feel anything to do with teaching. It just felt to do with life and just sorting your head out and knowing what you want to do and how you set about achieving that. And then that sort of started to run parallel with my development as a teacher and very quickly as a leader. As part of Fast Track for me, you had either one of two paths to choose. You either worked in a variety of schools to really build up your experience, vast and wide, or you went to schools with extreme situations, they used to call it. And the extreme situation that I went along to was a local school that had just been put into special measures, and that's where I got the bug of special measures and making a real difference. But the whole time was always with this undercurrent, not undercurrent necessarily, but this parallel journey of coaching for me as an individual, first of all. But then when I became a school leader, about 5 years in, then starting to see the power of that and the impact that can have on growing and developing others too. Both in my first headship and then when I took up my second headship here at East Park, it probably went into the stratosphere slightly because we were certainly in an extreme situation here, and I won't share it here. There's a whole book written about it if you fancy having a read. Pure Coaching talks about the whole journey. But coaching was used explicitly to ensure that journey went the way that it did. It certainly wasn't the one factor, but it was an absolute contributing factor that really helped that journey take place from special measures to outstanding in 9 terms it was at the time.
Yeah.
And then, of course, by then we were part of a family of schools, which was an amazing opportunity. And, of course, many, many more people, many more practitioners that all could benefit from that approach. And that's where we embarked upon the journey of spreading that vast and wide across the trust and beyond, really. As part of Leadership Edge, we've shared our journey and taken part in other people's outside of the trust as well, with the use of coaching being the vehicle to really help them move things along.
Yeah. So some similarities there
Yeah.
in that journey, that both of your introductions to coaching came from teaching, and both we've sort of been identified for that fast track sort of process. So I suppose one of the things that we talked about kind of capturing, particularly in this episode for people, is that they could be signposted to it. They've been told, we're going to set you up with a coach. And, well, my experience of coming into coaching was I was sitting in a governor's meeting and I was told from the leadership team that they'd had this opportunity to be coached, and it was very, very positive, and they were saying that it was this sort of this magic bullet kind of sort of thing, and it was Hayley that
Then
Hayley
you ended up with a duffer of a coach.
Hayley had delivered that coaching, so I sort of collared her at the end of the governor's meeting and said, "Oh, can I talk to you about this?" And that, so I actually sort of pursued it myself in that way. So my path is slightly different, but then it sort of joins that stream. So 2 questions, I suppose, to both of you is one. When you were told, right, you're going to be a coach, you're going to be coached, what was your first thoughts and feelings? Kind of first when you were told, secondly when you were about to sort of go into that first session, and then secondly, what is coaching to you? How would you describe? Someone says, right, you're going to be coached, and they said, okay, what's that? How would you kind of answer that question? So I don't know if those 2 questions will help each other out.
Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, coaching's come on its own journey, hasn't it? I mean, the coaching that I joined on Fast Track was in about 2004. And I think it's come a long way since then. Obviously, the word itself is an umbrella term and can mean many things to many people. You've got sports coaching, which is quite directive. This is how you need to throw the ball. You've got performance coaching, which is often used in the corporate sector to look at the company KPIs and how that person is performing against them and making incremental steps towards it. You've obviously got instructional coaching, which is fantastic in schools to look at the pedagogical practice of teachers and, again, creating those incremental steps to move them forwards. So at the point that I was offered coaching, I mean, I didn't know anything, I didn't know really what teaching was at that point because I was so new to it. It was just part of my journey from that moment. I guess I assumed it was just going to be an expert giving me guidance, which now I know it isn't. And in fairness, even when I was experiencing it, that many years ago, there was a definite shock to my system when I was given so much space to answer my own questions and think things through for myself, and that actually I was given autonomy to make choices, which I laugh at now because it's just daily bread and butter for what we do as coaches. But because I was young in my career, in terms of it was my first year I had it from my PGCE course, so it was just part of learning how to be a teacher, was learning how to step into that sense of responsibility and being proactive for my own decisions. I think what's also interesting now is to just put the lens on it of the role I currently have. It's, for instance, doing accreditations for people who are coming through the Leadership Edge programme and seeing their journey from not knowing anything about coaching to being invited to have a coach. And it's very similar responses around, I don't really know what this involves, I'm assuming somebody's just going to help develop me, but it's one-to-one, so I'm a bit nervous, I could feel a bit vulnerable. And then the actual experience of those sessions is different again when the realisation occurs, like it happened to me, that, oh, this is for me, this is for my thinking. And that can be quite intimidating when we're used to being in a very fast-paced environment where we ask for solutions, we get solutions and we move on. To the pace in coaching is much slower and the intention is much deeper. And that can really catch people off guard. It's not a quick fix and it's not surface level. So you're really expected to talk very truthfully and very, very openly about some really personal things. How do you feel you're performing in your role? How do you feel you are as an individual? Are there areas of your life, either inside or outside of work, that you want to make some change to? Deeply personal and intimate conversations that you can end up having. And I think, in answer to your second question, what is coaching? That's pretty much the nub of it. I think it was Julie Starr in one of her original books, described it as coming from the old horse and trap coach. So a coach in a carriage with a horse in the olden days, where you would move from one point to another point. So it is about a journey, but you're the driver as the coachee, but you've got a coach next to you on that journey, pointing out different roads you could take, different cobbles in the road that you might just want to look out for, and exploring your options with you. So in terms of what is coaching, it's moving forwards. And the example you gave, Alan, of I went and explored that, I heard about it, and so I went and followed up with a conversation with Hayley, is the mindset you need if you're going to get the most out of coaching. I think if you're trying to encourage people to experience coaching when they don't want to change, and they don't have that sense of, oh, I wonder how I could do things differently, I wonder how I could develop in a different way, then it's going to be a much slower journey for them. It doesn't mean they can't start it and experience it, but the ideal person to coach is someone who is ready to explore what they could do differently because they're excited about what they could do and what opportunities are out there.
I think that journey into coaching really does pave the way for what your relationship with it is going to be. For me, again, it was a choice. Well, that's great when it's your individual choice and that's what you want to do. But I think there's a whole host of other people that come to it through all sorts of different routes, and particularly when, like us, we have an organisation where we champion coaching. We have a lot of people come and join us who don't ordinarily, they haven't come across particularly our style of coaching as well and what that means. And since I began the coaching journey up until now, coaching was a real buzzword. I'd say it still really is. And actually the understanding of what it is underneath it, there are times where I'd quite like to call it a different word, the type of coaching that we do, because people have other experiences. Often they have some real negative baggage around that. And they hear the word coaching and they hear the word in their head competency and all sorts of other connotations from the experiences that they've had. So whenever I'm trying to encourage or even just open the doors to what our coaching is, the explanation around it is really, really important, because the last thing that you want is that somebody's previous experience, particularly if it's negative, to shade their interpretation of what that might be, because it can completely shut down any potential that they could have.
So can we try and capture that to say, and one, what's that other side of coaching that maybe it's been sort of taken off the shelf, used by people that aren't necessarily trained in it? They might well be very, very competent in their role, but they've been asked to coach people as well, so they're kind of going with what they think. I suppose, is that more towards that instructional, that side of things? And then how would you describe how maybe you could put those two things together, the type of coaching sessions that you're talking about and the approach to coaching that we're talking about, compared to that, and so that people can kind of hear, it's not going to be like this, it's going to be more like that.
Yeah, I think instructional coaching is far easier to come to when obviously you're talking about an area of expertise that you have, because at least half of what you need is a really sound knowledge about what you are coaching about. The other side of things are the coaching skills that go with that. Now, for our style of coaching, for pure coaching, you don't actually have to be an expert in anything that you are coaching about, which when you tell people that...
That sounds great.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I'm going to be great at it. But actually, true quality coaching has a number of strands and a number of skills that are threaded through it that have to be learnt And importantly, first, before they're learned, they have to be experienced.
Okay.
And I think in so many different scenarios that I've come across along my journey, so many people have been given the title of coach or become a coach. It's been on their job description. They will openly say, oh, and I'm a coach. And you think, I'm going to have a great conversation with this person. And then you start to realise they don't really have any theory or understanding of coach. It's just become this buzzword that's attached to something like you're going to mentor. No, it's more fashionable now to say that you're going to coach. Oh, great, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
The understanding and the theory that sits behind it.
Yeah, and the idea of the expert-novice dynamic is one that I find really helpful to explain to people, that pure coaching does not hold a novice and expert dynamic. The coach isn't pulling that person in a direction because they know better and they know that this coachee will perform better or be happier if they do certain things. We hold that the coachee themselves are the expert in their experience and in their life. They know more than the coach will ever know. And therefore, the space belongs to the coachee. It doesn't belong to the coach to get what they can out of their coachee. The responsibility lies with the coachee, so the person being coached. This is their space, this is their time, and they can move the session and the conversation and the action into a direction that feels right for them. So in Leadership Edge, we use the coaching spectrum, which has directive coaching at one end, which is where the coach is the expert, and they will give suggestions and advice and guidance, and the person being coached will follow that to make progress. But at Leadership Edge and in pure coaching, we're at the other end of the spectrum, which is non-directive coaching. We're not setting the agenda, we're not setting the direction. So the skills that we use, rather than advising and telling people what to do, is listening, reflecting back what we hear that person saying so they can hear it from a different person or a different medium, so they can hear it back. We're holding up a mirror to them and holding that space for their thinking. So we might summarise what we are hearing them say, so that they can clarify whether that is what they mean or whether, no, actually it's something else. And in the end of it, that coachee has much greater clarity on what their reality is and what their aspirations are. And of course, a big part of coaching, which we'll get to, I'm sure, is the idea of ending each session with a way forward. But that way forward, as we've been saying, isn't the responsibility of the coach to set, because we don't know the right step. The coachee knows the right step.
Yeah, and I think I just feel really excited about my next coaching session, just talking about it. But so just to sort of, to be that person, to try and offer the people, anyone listening to this, helpful steps and insight to those people that are hearing this and saying, "Oh, right, that's starting to make sense." And I think we're all saying that there's a place for directive coaching.
Yeah.
There is a place where you need the benefit of the expert.
Yeah.
And we're just talking about offering something else. And again, it's just so at this pure coaching side of the spectrum. So what is the benefit to the coachee who's saying, well, if it's all coming from me, what if I just sit down and think about it instead? Then I don't. If they're not an expert, what's my benefit of sitting with that coach? And so, what would you say to them if they're saying, well?
I feel like we need to start a new recording and do a whole podcast on this point. Because there's so much.
But we go to. I suppose the reason and also to sort of say, I know that we're going to have a later conversation at another point about that skill set, and you talked about listening. We're going, that's a skill set in itself, and that holding up a mirror, it's a skill in what you hold up.
Absolutely, and I think that's key.
But we'll talk about that. But if we focus on the coachee in this time, so what's their benefit? That to actually talk to a coach and an experienced coach, what are they going to benefit from if they just sat down and just thought about their problems?
Well, just to dispel any myth, this isn't a magical fairy tale mirror that when you look into it, it says you're beautiful, you're so good at your job, you're wonderful at everything you do. This is a very accurate.
I'm less excited about my coaching session now.
Let's move on to this next time. So this is a very actual, real reflection of yourself, and a reflection of yourself that through the use of your coach, you are challenged, and you, whilst there is a good dollop of support within it, you're probed and you are challenged to help you to move your thinking on. Now, you don't get that from just looking into the fairy tale mirror and seeing how wonderful everything is.
Absolutely.
Whilst they are very lovely people, our coaches that we have grown and developed and very supportive, their job isn't just to put an arm around you, get you a cup of coffee and make sure you've got a biscuit. It's there to really push and shape your thinking at your pace and around the thing that you hold as most important. That's key. But it's there to really challenge you and to make you feel uncomfortable at times. And yes, if you choose not, when you walk away from a coaching session, not to follow through with what you've spent a great deal of time exploring, it might be exactly the right reason that you haven't followed it through, but your coach will bring you back to that, to say, we spent an hour and a half with this. Is this not important anymore? And it might not be important, and that's okay. But they will always ask that question that at times are the easier questions not to ask yourself.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and so bringing that other perspective, and as you were talking, Hayley, I was thinking about that competence stairway model, you know, that we don't know what we don't know, and we can start off being unconsciously incompetent until we get to the awkward stage of being consciously incompetent, which is where, you know, we have to really start asking ourselves, well, how can we become consciously competent until eventually, you know, we're in our flow and we're unconsciously competent because we know we've forgotten that we didn't know how to do this at any point. So you're being challenged and you're having your blind spots shined and highlighted for you. So that's one really good point of coaching. If you've got the mindset for it. And just hearing someone else's perspective as well, because as a coach, whilst we don't make any judgments about what our coachee is telling us, we might play devil's advocate, and we might certainly bring your attention to considerations of, well, how might your colleagues view this? How might other stakeholders view this? So you're getting a bit of a 360, but no one's judging you, and it's just private between you and your coach. So everything's confidential, unless obviously there's a disclosure of safeguarding matter or so on. So you have a confidential, non-judgmental space for you to talk about you. And that's really rare, really rare.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can bring anything that you want to that session, which is really rare. You're in charge of the agenda. So in terms of what do people walk away with, aside from the actual actions of what they intend to do and a greater clarity of why they're doing it, there's a sense of, and what we hear all the time, don't know if you see that, is that sense of being empowered because your coach has an unconditional positive regard for you and your resourcefulness. So we will challenge you to dig into that resourcefulness and say, what can you do to support yourself to achieve what it is you want to achieve? So you feel empowered because suddenly you're tapping into your strengths rather than the barriers. And suddenly you're tapping into your potential rather than the limitations that you feel around you. So it really is like a light switch for a lot of people, and their whole attitude and sense of proactivity, but also responsibility that, gosh, I now realise that I can do these things. I really need to go and do it, and I'm motivated to do it. So, I hear it all the time, as I'm sure you do, Hayley, but when we speak to people who have come to coaching, it can genuinely be life-changing for them because it's about their mindset. So it isn't just about doing better for school. It's about feeling better, more confident and more empowered as a person.
Yeah, and I mean, like that's my experience. I went in with enthusiasm, but no expectation, and not sort of connecting it to any outcome, just out of curiosity and just wanting to sort of to explore. But also one of the things that I think that I've got from, and I can go back to sort of because it was you, Hayley, who was my first coach, and to go through my massive understanding of neuroscience, which is not massive, but one of the things
sounds impressive though.
Yeah, I could say it. But that there's that thing of when you are working on a problem by yourself, you're working within the systems that all exist, and chimp and human and computer is like terms at Man and Matt that we all use, but. And I know that limiting beliefs come up a lot sort of in coaching, and that was something for me as well. That's something that I would tell people is you might not be aware, especially if everything is happening silently, like, that you're just dealing with these things of what, because I can remember I sort of came in, I was just like, I don't really know what I'm going to talk about here. Like, I feel a bit bad about about sort of wasting Hayley's time with this, even though, it was like, it was an arrangement, it was all paid for, it wasn't. Yeah, but and it was a very common thing I've had going into coaching sessions to say, I'm going to waste this person's time because I don't know what I'm going to talk about. As soon as I started, and then I think one of Hayley's first question was, so why are you trying to do it like that? And that was just like the curtain came down and I was just like, okay, why am I don't, and that was because that belief was in my head of like, you have to find a way to solve this problem. But I'd never asked myself the question of, so for me, immediately that's what a coach, because you don't know what those limiting beliefs are without that kind of insight. So that was a really, really big thing for me as well. I don't know if you can sort of speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, we use the analogy of an iceberg, which is a great metaphor for many things, isn't it? But in coaching, we try to work beneath the water level. And by that, I mean that above the water level, you've got the problem, you've got the issue, you've got the thing that in a typical management meeting, you might go and discuss, we need to solve this problem. But as a coach, as Hayley did for you, it wouldn't be, well, tell me about the nitty-gritty of that problem and we'll work it out together. Mm-hmm. It's, well, underneath that, you're the person who's going to be tackling this problem. So let's look at you. Let's look at why this matters to you. Let's look at why you're taking the approach that you are. Let's look at which strengths you're using to do that. Let's look at what your fears are about if this doesn't go right. Let's look at your communication skills and who do you need to bring on board with this. So it really is a person-centred experience rather than tackling the sort of surface level. And obviously the benefit of that is that yes, you can go and deal with that problem, but you're looking at long-term ability to dig into that resourcefulness and that self-awareness for whenever those problems or similar problems come up in the future.
Now this is deep and meaningful.
Yeah, thanks, Hayley.
This is really deep and these don't happen by here's your coach. There you go for your first session. Off you go. I think Catherine referred to earlier that this is a slow burner.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to do it to this depth and this degree, you've got to really establish a highly effective relationship between coach and coachee. And that has to build.
Yeah.
Because trust has to build. You have to start to stretch one another to see how that feels. Get used to what it creates within a session, because the more familiar and comfortable you become with it, that's when you end up below the water.
Yeah, don't be put off, people.
Well,
don't let that scare you, because it's also, you can call it the dance of coaching, and the coach is skilled in moving around you, and where are you in your thinking and your readiness to answer some of those questions. And we dip in with a question below the water level, and we can test the temperature and go, we're still up there. We're still up there. That's fine. Depth under, still up there. That's fine.
You've guessed my next question, actually, that I was going to say. I would imagine that, as experienced coaches, you're almost like a boxer. You're not planning your moves. You're going in with your skill set, and then you're responding to what they give you. Because I'd imagine you have certain sort of adrenaline junkie type coachees that you want to hold that mirror up and you want to really challenge them, and you want to sort of what are your fears and how can we challenge them, and others that you feel let's just pull on that thread a little bit more slowly, and so is that something that sort of at the center of that coaching approach, that it's very much about what's the most helpful thing for this person in terms of how deep we go. And some people might be very, very comfortable, like the person that's very comfortable with their fears and might actually not want to be very vulnerable at all, but they just want to be challenged and they want that reality. And then somebody who actually maybe doesn't want that, they want some fairy tale mirror. They want a little less of that, but they can make themselves very vulnerable and talk about some quite deep things very, very quickly. But it's the coach that...
Yeah, I mean, when I first started North Star coaching, I came up with this 3A approach to coaching, and that's awareness, authenticity, and then achievement. And you can't really be authentic and you can't really achieve what you want to achieve in life until you're aware of who you are. But that in itself is a hugely sensitive and personal journey and exploration. And absolutely, a lot of people, we were talking about what is coaching, and a lot of people come to it with the belief that it is very professional, which it is professional, but we're person-centred for that professional. And you can tell as a coach quite quickly where their expectations are, even though you can contract. And it amuses me because we're spending this time talking about what is coaching. They're not going to know until they've done it because it just sounds sort of unbelievable in many ways.
But is there also, sorry to interrupt, is there, they won't know because it's going to be, it's their coaching.
Yes.
And we could sort of give them, and I'd love to give them a little bit of a sort of an overview of these are the types, because one of the things that I noticed from coaching, just to take a quick sort of step into like back into the conversation, is I would find myself between sessions coaching myself, and I'd be thinking, oh, I'll bring. So I'd think, oh, this is tricky. I'll bring this up with Hayley. Well, I know that she's going to ask me this, so what would I say to that? And then she's gonna, and I'll do this, and then I'll probably. So we'll go through possibilities. Then we'll go through this. Then I'll go through it, and I'll be like, oh, that's quite a good idea. I'll try that. And I thought, oh, and then I'd get out of the situation and think, oh, I've got to find something else to talk to Hayley next
But
time.
that's one of the lovely byproducts of being coached.
Uh-huh.
When you regularly flex that muscle and develop that muscle, you start to be able to do it without the coach there.
Yeah.
Because you know the questions that you will be asked. You know how you will be framed to help you with your thinking.
So if anyone's listening to this and, you know, I take it, it's very rigid, it's exactly the same for every person, it's timed for each bit, sort of just chucking that one out there. But what sort of stages are typical? How much do you sort of diverge from them? But sort of from a coaching session, from a pure coaching session, you know, how would that look like? And then sort of, you know, I'm conscious of the time in this conversation. We'll sort of, and then we can kind of wrap that up and then just kind of capture just a last bit about coaching. But firstly, before we sort of go into that part, what can they expect from a pure coaching session?
Really long moments to think.
Okay.
Which is really uncomfortable to begin with.
Uh-huh.
And often you look back at your coachee in the first couple of sessions, and even with their eyes and their body language, they are trying to prompt a response from you to fill the silence. And when you don't give it to them, there's a whole variety of different reactions that you can see. You can see them being very confused. You can see them getting a little antsy. Well, you're here, I've paid you this money to come here and coach me, and you're not coaching me, you're not telling me anything. And everything in between, really. And I think people's individual journeys, you can't describe one size that fits everybody who starts on that journey. You can get people that the rapport builds with them very, very quickly, and you can feel a safety. And you get a sense of that safety from the type of things that they want to talk to you about and how deeply they want to explore those things. Similarly, you get those people who don't want to offer that rapport to you very easily, and they want to really check you out, and that provides more giving from you so that you can see that this will be a two-way relationship. You can't shortcut that journey of the rapport, because if you don't have that, it will be worthless. You won't get to anything that's meaningful in those sessions. I've had situations where that can be established in the first session. Rapport, very quickly established. We all know where we're at. We're getting something from this. We're going to be able to go below the water quite quickly here. You also get situations where it can take up to 2 to 3 to 4 sessions.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think in those, when I've had those situations, I almost narrate what we're trying to do in them so that there's some firmer understanding of the coachee, of I understand why these are so uncomfortable, these sessions, to give them a little bit of understanding and reassurance, because just sitting them in those sessions and saying, okay, ready for another uncomfortable session? Here we go. Yeah. It's not, you're not going to break down that barrier.
Yeah, and I think that what's really important about that, and your point, Alan, as well, is what can they expect? They can expect to be in the driving seat. And so they are empowered to feed back to the coach. If they're nervous, they're unlikely to do that initially, but the coach will try to seek it out of them if they are finding it really uncomfortable. And as Hayley's alluded to that, as a coach, we try to be really transparent about that this is their space. I'm getting the feeling this is not very comfortable for you. Am I right? Do you want to talk to me about what's going on for you right now? Because I want to help you to get the most out of these sessions. And then, we go at their pace and at their depth. So it's very difficult to answer what can they expect other than unconditional positive regard for them and their resourcefulness, a non-judgmental, compassionate and confidential listening partner. And as Hayley said, time to pause and to think about something which is really important to them.
I've just had a flashback. I remember possibly one of the actual moments that I felt safe enough in our coaching sessions to take you a little bit deeper under the water, and I couldn't even remember the question.
Glad we're doing this
on
air recording.
I couldn't remember the question.
We're talking about vulnerability. I'm experiencing it.
No, I can't. The context of it isn't important, but I'm sure you'll pick it up from the nature of the question. So my question was to you: do you always follow by the rules?
Yeah, no, I can remember that.
Do you remember it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a big. I think your actual question was: do you always do exactly what you're told to do? And given I know that might sound like it might not sound like a very profound question, but given the context of the conversation we were in,
within it,
because that was a moment that kind of shattered things, and it wasn't about driving above the speed limit, and it wasn't about sort of breaking it. It was more about, do you follow these norms? Do you have these set beliefs that are limiting?
That was specifically to push some of that limiting belief and to push.
Exactly, yeah, and I definitely experienced that. But I think, and just before, again, you never say one more question because there's always another question. But what if somebody's listening to this now and saying, okay, that all sounds like really, and I can hear that sounds totally different to my image of coaching. What I was picturing was kind of directional mentoring and like being connected to sort of KPIs and that type of thing. But this sounds like counselling and like this sounds like therapy. So how is it? Is it different to therapy? Like, is it different to kind of counselling?
The most significant difference here is that pure coaching is about looking forward. Counselling is about looking backwards and to resolve things that have already happened, and also requires a completely different skill set and qualifications. And as pure coaches, we don't have that skill set and don't protest to have that. No. We don't go there. So the most distinct difference that I can give you between those is those areas that you allude to there, therapy, counselling, they're all about looking back at things that have happened. That's not to say that you don't use looking back as a frame of reference in pure coaching, but pure coaching is designed to help you look forward.
Yeah, I sometimes use the metaphor of, fishing in the pool of the past. So in coaching, we may well dip into things from the past and say, what have you done previously that is similar to this, or that you learned
what's worked?
Yeah, what's worked or what hasn't worked, or when have you had a golden moment in here that's really felt aligned to what you want to be doing. So you can use that and you can dip into that pool, pick out that experience, and then I say, right, we're going to put it on the bank and we're going to have a look through it and decide which bits of that you're going to take forward to on the next stage of your thinking. Whereas in therapy, you would stay there and you would be really analysing and unpicking and looking at what happened in the past and how, going really under the water psychologically around the impact that had on you,
the triggers that it gives you.
Yeah, and so it's it obviously opens people up to having some very painful memories or experiences brought up for them. And as Hayley said, we're not trained to close those. So if we're getting the sense that somebody's going still into the pool of the past and not able to discern which of that is relevant for a coaching session, which parts that is relevant for a coaching session, then we of course stop the conversation, signpost them to further support in counselling or
the
therapy.
discipline
or
of the
whatever.
coach is really important in that.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're in a conversation, it's quite natural for a conversation just to flow, and you don't want to find yourself in that place where you've made that coachee incredibly vulnerable in terms of counselling or whatever that may be. So there's that discipline that's always running through the back of the coach's mind.
Yeah.
Am I keeping them on track? Am I keeping them focused on the forward?
Yes. So the questioning
Not
is
the
really
back.
important there, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if they start referring to something in the past, then we will use our questioning to say, that sounds really interesting. What did you learn from that you can put into practice now?
Uh-huh. So it
you're
becomes
forward
forward-facing.
focused. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's, well, again, I mean, I know that we have, like, we've just touched the surface, and we're only a couple of little bits down in the sort of the iceberg. But if anyone's listening to this, and Catherine, if they've thought, well, this sounds great, but they're not part of Manor Mat, and they want to get involved with Leadership Edge, how can they find you? What sort of avenues have they got with Leadership Edge?
Yeah, look on our website, leadershipedge.org.uk, and you'll see all our services there. We obviously offer individual coaching, so leadership coaching, and also emotional support coaching, which just pulls back a little bit from the action setting at the end of the sessions and rather holds the space for processing current emotions. It's really powerful for DSLs or pastoral leaders who are dealing with some very complex, emotionally burdening cases, to give them the space to process that for them. But what we're talking about here with Hayley and Manor is the 3-tier coaching accreditation process, which starts with a participant experiencing coaching, because as we've all agreed today, you can't really move forward in developing a coaching culture until you really know what you mean, and you've got a shared understanding across a number of colleagues, across a number of areas of the school or trust, who have this shared understanding of what we mean when we say coaching. Pure coaching. So it starts off with the foundation stage where you get 4 sessions of coaching, and most people do come accustomed to what that means during those 4 sessions. We found it's the right length of time to demonstrate the impact for that individual experiencing being coached. But at the same time, they get a skills pack, so they reflect on 4 fundamental coaching skills, which they will start to observe in their coach. So after each session, they're asked to just do a 15-minute written reflection on, firstly, what has that session done for me? How have I benefited as a coachee? But secondly, which of those skills can I see that my coach was using in those sessions? How did they use it? And what impact did that have on me? So you do that 4 times. At the end of those 4 sessions, you submit those written reflections to another member of our coaching team who holds a 30-minute accreditation conversation with you, where we ask you to articulate what you've learned and what you've gained from the process. And then you would be ready to move on to the practitioner stage, which is when you start to cascade it internally. So you then take colleagues through the foundation stage yourself. But as I alluded to at the start, importantly, we don't just think that now you know what it is, you can go ahead and do it really confidently and competently. We support you with ongoing one-to-one supervision. So with the same coach you had at foundation stage, so that rapport and trust has already been built between you, you can now go in the same terms of confidentiality and non-judgment to speak with that coach about how you're developing as a coach, what's going well in those sessions, what's being challenging in those sessions, where do you know you've done a stonkingly good job, and where do you think, oh my gosh, what on earth am I doing, what value could that have possibly added? And we will again help you to move up that scale of competence so that you can see what you're doing well. And then there's a further stage where you become the lead coach, where you really learn how to be a supervisor for the internal coaches who you're bringing up underneath you. And then eventually there's a membership where schools can become self-sustaining, so they get access to our materials to use them as they wish within the organisation, and access to group supervision sessions to meet with other lead coaches across the country who are doing this in their own settings as well, with a mid-year consultation from us just to help that review of where have you got to, what are your next steps, and so on. So anyone curious about it, whatever stage they're at in their thinking and their understanding, you can tell we just love talking about it and would love to see more people involved in the power and experiencing it.
Yeah, Absolutely. And Hayley, if anyone from sort of Manor, primarily that's where this sort of podcast is going out to.
Yep.
If they're hearing this and thinking, oh, I'd like to be coached kind of in my setting, what sort of options
to flag that to whoever their line manager is, their head teacher. We liaise across the trust regularly on our coaching pairs and on new members of staff who come along who express that interest. Doesn't matter what time of year it is, doesn't matter at what point, in people's different stages in their development, be that a teacher, be that a TA, whatever role you have. We have a whole vast array of people who are coached, office staff, pastoral staff. Basically just shout out and somebody will scoop you up, and generally either you or Cheryl Short will pair them with somebody most appropriate so they can start their journey.
Yeah. Credit goes to Cheryl for that one, I'd say. She's definitely got the organisational genius for that one. Mm-hmm. And there's coaching advocates across every school. So there's structure with that. And what I'd say to that as well, sort of finally, is that either end of the spectrum being, if you love your role and you just want security and stability in that role, or you're extremely ambitious and you want to be on some sort of fast track program, and you want the next thing and the next thing, and you want to sort of broaden that impact. For me, coaching is just a vital piece of the jigsaw for either of those things. You need to be able to unravel your own thinking, you need to be able to reflect, and you need to be able to just have that space for yourself, whatever part of the spectrum you're on. So, and I personally haven't experienced anything that offers you that other than pure coaching. That kind of forward-facing way to unravel in a really individual, meaningful way for yourself. So I'd really, really strongly recommend it to anybody, whatever it is that they're looking on their own personal horizon.
Yeah, and it's a huge gift that you're giving to people, given the challenging context of schools, as we know, where it is 100 miles an hour the minute you step your foot out of your car in the car park, isn't it? There's very little time to gather your thoughts and really think about yourself, and the impact that this has for personal well-being as well as professional development is huge. And you don't necessarily need to know right now particularly what it is you want to talk about. It doesn't have to be as defined as I know I want coaching on this.
Yeah.
Because what actually you're going to be coached on is you. So all you need to do is bring yourself to a session, and you might unravel all sorts of things that actually are going to support you in becoming the best version of yourself.
That's the apex right there, Catherine. So